Aloha kako. So I'm Sam, Ohukani ōhi'a Gon, and I wanted to start by acknowledging my training in dual worlds. I'm a Western-trained conservation biologist. I've earned my bachelor's and my master's degrees in zoology and my PhD in ethology, which is the study of animal behavior. The latter two degrees from the University of California at Davis. And this is the Hawaiian animal that gave me my PhD. I studied the behavior, ecology, and evolution of the Hawaiian happy-faced spider, and at the same time its role in native Hawaiian forests. In my work as a conservation biologist with the Nature Conservancy, I've seen firsthand maybe more native Hawaiian plants and animals than most Kanaka see in a few lifetimes. And I make it my duty to these native Hawaiian species to know their names and their status on all of the islands. But I owe my Ike Hawaii and my Na'au Hawaii, my traditional knowledge and intuition, to many kumu, but the one who I sat with for the last dozen years and from whom I learned oli and protocol, and who put me through the uniki hu'elepo to emerge as a practitioner of oli and protocol, a kahuna kakalaleo. That one is kumu John Keola Maka'inana Kalahui o Kalani no Kamehameha e Kolu Lake. Shown here leading us in chants for Queen Lili'uokalani's birthday at Iolani Palace a few years back. But Hawaii Kuauli is the title of my presentation. It means roughly Hawaii, the verdant back, and is one of the descriptive eponyms for Hawaii, the Pai'aina, the High Island Archipelago. But uli is a rich word. It evokes the dark green of dense forests, or the dark blue of deep ocean depths, or the pregnant heavy darkness of rain clouds. It implies a deepness not only of color but of time and of spirit. This kind of depth is not to be found in a small place or a low place, but in a large place where the islands are so massive as to throw shadows into the sky to frame the rising moon, or to deflect hurricanes, or to intercept and gather moisture from the world's winds, and with that moisture generate life unlike anywhere else in the world. So let's enter now into that living realm.
Tu mahareua tu moho ki e la hiuga iuka ho ia ue la ga e tana hele e hoa ka nano ia tu ai tu alono e ho ime.
And if I could, it would be my great pleasure to take you to see the many ecosystems that I've had a chance to experience firsthand in my conservation career in Hawaii. But since I can't do that, I can do the next best thing and offer you a virtual tour of the highlights of the living ecosystems of Hawaii. The native plants, animals, and ecosystems of Hawaii form a unique biogeographic province rich enough to include representatives of all of the world's biomes except for tundra. This island ecoregion's history of change, though, has taken it through a period of habitation by an island people who developed a culture as rich and unique as their natural setting, a setting that enabled Hawaiian culture to flourish as one of the pinnacles in Polynesian societies, excelling in voyaging, in featherwork, in fishing and fish ponds, household amenities, kapa fabrics, and crafts of all kinds, and generating an equally rich cultural system in the pre-contact society that developed within it. 1,500 years of habitation contributed to a course of ecosystem changes that greatly accelerated after Western contact and today culminate in huge challenges to native species and ecosystems and those charged to protect and manage them. But here are the main Hawaiian islands in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. The Hawaiian Islands are the most isolated high islands on Earth, with 2,500 miles or more separating Hawaii from the surrounding continents. And without the help of people, only those animals who could brave a transoceanic voyage by air or waves were among the colonizers. But once arrived and successfully colonized, here they developed into species like none other on the planet, co-adapted and balanced, as the curved bill of the i'iwi is a match for the tubular flowers of the koli'i, a native lobeliad. So that while the i'iwi receives a nectar meal from the flower, the plant's anthers deposit pollen precisely on its head. About 90% of the roughly 1,200 species of native Hawaiian vascular plants are entirely restricted to the Hawaiian Islands. Some, like the silver sword of Haleakala, are found only on a single island, a single mountain, a single region of that mountain. And the proliferation of bird species, such as these Hawaiian honey creepers, from a single ancestor, put the celebrated finches of the Galapagos to shame. Terrestrial Hawaiian ecosystems have been called systems of birds and invertebrates. And indeed, aside from the native bat, the major animal components were a few hundred bird species and over 10,000 endemic species of insects and other invertebrates. Here's a spectacular example, a gigantic picture-winged Hawaiian pumice fly, a well-known genus Drosophila, one of over 800 Hawaiian species of Drosophila, more species of Drosophila than for any other single known place on Earth. And here, by comparison, that you didn't even notice, is a miserable little lab Drosophila, the standard in genetic research. Marine endemism, although much lower by terrestrial standards, is extremely high compared to other global marine regions. Fishes are the marine analogs of birds, and for fishes, nearly a quarter of the species found in the Hawaiian waters are only found in Hawaiian waters. This level of endemism is among the highest in the marine world. In addition, a recent study found that over 50% of the reef fish individuals observed during daytime surveys are endemic species. This very large proportion of endemic fish observed suggests that they play important ecological roles in Hawaiian marine ecosystems, far higher than their percentage alone of 24% might indicate. Hawaiian marine invertebrate endemism is even higher, with about a third of known species on average entirely restricted to Hawaiian waters. The level of uniqueness varies by group, with different percentages among the Hawaiian sponges, the hard corals, the zoanthelids, the sea cucumbers, the sea urchins, brittle stars, other sea stars, for example. This extremely high endemism on land and sea, coupled with huge ecological amplitude in the Hawaiian archipelago, distinguishes it as a world biogeographic province. There's a very wide range of ecosystems and habitat conditions in the Hawaiian island chain. Topography, for example, ranges from uneroded, youthful lava landscapes too young for any gulches or valleys, as on the still active Mauna Loa volcano on the island of Hawaii, to razorback ridges created as the end product of millions of years of erosion, as shown by the 5+ million-year-old cliffs of Napali on the island of Kauai. From lands that were created just this morning, barren and devoid of life, to climax forests supporting thousands of species. From subalpine cinderlands as dry as any of the world's deserts, to arguably the wettest spot on Earth at Waialeale on Kauai. From coastal dunes at sea level to snow-capped volcanic summits just shy of 14,000 feet on Mauna Kea. So let's begin our tour of Hawaiian ecosystems from coast to summit and then down the stream to the sea. The coastlines of Hawaii are generally sunny and dry, with dunes of coral sands or rough lava cliffs creating a challenging landscape. But native dwarf shrublands built of plants such as these hina, endemic beach heliotropes, stabilize and clothe the dunes, just as the pa'u ōhi'a protected the baby hi'iaka at Kaena. In 1 square meter of rich coastal vegetation can be found aveoveo, ohelokai, akudikulikai, kakona grass, and hina, all coexisting among the coral rubble near Elio Point on Molokai. One very special coastal forest type is found only on the islet called Huelo Rock, off the sea cliffs of Molokai. A stand of native coastal lolu palms occupies the top of the islet, and rats have all but eliminated it from the sea cliffs where it probably also once dominated. Forbes was a botanist visiting Hawaii in the 1800s, and he documented Hawaiians climbing the 100-foot precipice of Huelo, then holding on to the large fan-like fronds of the lolu palms, leaping off the top and gliding very steeply into the churning ocean, just for fun. And here's a view from within the lolu forest at the top of Huelo Rock to give you a feel, just in case you want to try that someday. Another coastal forest type of great significance is hala forest, found on all of the main islands. Now paka is a typical understory plant over here, and lauhala, of course, is the plating material of choice, creating fine mats used in ancient Hawaii as well as in homes today. Of course, plants are only one element of coastal ecosystems. There are many animals that call the coasts home, such as this Hawaiian monk seal called iliokai, dog of the sea. An alternate name is ilioholoikawawa. Is translated in the Hawaiian dictionary as dog that runs in the rough seas, but the word wawa means glutinous, like jello. And if you've ever watched a monk seal move across the sand, you can see why I think the name should be translated as dog that runs in a wawa kind of way. Sandy beaches are also the required nesting sites for sea turtles, such as honu, who return to very specific sites to dig their nests and lay their eggs. Such animals are revered by many Hawaiian families as aumakua, or ancestors. Seabirds in the ancient past, seabird nesting colonies were not relegated to offshore islets, but extensively covered the main islands. Their contribution to the nutrient cycle of pre-human vegetated ecosystems must have been really significant. Their significance in Hawaiian culture can be seen in the banner of Lono, the Hawaiian god of the winter wet season, and the makahiki, a time of peace and athletic games. Many of the pelagic seabirds return to the islands to nest during these times, and so were woven into the major symbol of the season. One unusual coastal system found between land and sea is anchialine pools, and these are brackish waters that fluctuate with the tide, near but separated from the sea. And in fact, that's what the word anchialine means. Anki, nearby, and alanos, the salty sea. Here, endemic red shrimp, opai ula, are the major life forms among the other invertebrates and algae that thrive best in a fish-free environment. When they emerge at high tide from rock crevices, they can become so numerous as to turn waters blood red and reveal hidden murders, as in the story of Popo Alaya at Waianapanapa on Maui. Moving away from the coast and uphill a bit, in a trade wind setting, the leeward lowland flanks are usually dry. Yet such areas receiving less than 10 inches of rainfall a year may lie only 5 miles from rainforested summits receiving over 200 inches of annual rainfall. Grasslands, shrublands, and summer deciduous forests of native trees such as these wiliwili were widespread in the dry lowlands of ancient Hawaii. There's a saying, "Pua ka wiliwili na nahu ka mano." When the wiliwili blooms, the sharks bite. And indeed, the late summer bloom of wiliwili that precedes the coming of the ho'oilo, or wet season, corresponds with the annual mating aggregation of some sharks, forming the ranks of fins called lalani kalalea. Other trees, such as ōhi'a, share an open woodland with wiliwili on sun-baked lava plains. And an alternate Hawaiian name for the ōhi'a is ōhekukulu'ai'o, indicating the light, strong branches were used to make stilts, which are called kukulu'ai'o, used in special ceremonial dances to lift the performers above the audience. Indeed, the Hawaiian stilt is also called kukulu'ai'o and is tied by name to this lowland tree. On geologically young islands, lava flows support pioneer lowland dry forests dominated by ōhi'a lehua, despite almost no soil development. Their red blossoms open and they lend the lava flats of ka'u and puna bright color, so that Lohiau offered the observation, "O puna lehua ula i ka papa, I ula i ka papa ka lehua o puna." Puna is the land of the red lehua on the lava flats, so the plains are reddened by the lehua blossoms of puna. And where it's too dry for trees, mixed shrublands of hardy species such as a'ali'i and pukiave cover the land. The hardiness of the a'ali'i is celebrated in metaphor. The people of Ka'u say, "He a'ali'i ku makaniau, a'ohe makani e hinai." I am an a'ali'i standing in the wind, and no force can take me down. Leeward lowlands such as Kipa, Hoi Hoi, and Kona support extensive pili grasslands which provided the preferred roof thatching for Hawaiian structures. Lowland dry forms of akoko, a milky sapped euphorbia, add a softer texture to the rough landscape near Ka'ena Point on Oahu. Dwarf shrublands, such as this one of Ilima, form a colorful carpet in the many coastal and lowland areas in Hawaii, here on the windswept lava coast of Kalaupapa on Molokai, and the delicate flowers of the Ilima are painstakingly strung into one of the most highly prized lei of Hawaii. The bright flags of color of the ōhi'a join the Ilima, and they grow from sea level to about 500 feet, pollinated by native bees. The lowlands were also where the majority of iliahi, that's sandalwood, grows. It's one of the many tree species that can be found in the diverse Hawaiian lowland mesic forest. In fact, there are more species of native trees found in lowland dry and mesic forests than in wet forests. The Hawaiian poppy, called puakala, that is thorny flower, because of the sharp spines at the tips of its leaves, thrives in some of the most dry and desolate areas near sea level. Archibald Menzies, a visiting botanist of the 1800s, found a Hawaiian woman manipulating the flowers of the native poppy, and when he asked what she was doing, she informed him that by taking the ehu, the pollen, of one flower to another, she would increase the number of edible seeds. And this is a glimpse of the intimacy of the empirical science of Hawaiians in their living landscape. The bright yellow flower of the Hawaiian cotton, the ma'o, marks some of the driest native shrublands just above the coast on Oahu, Maui, Molokai, Lanai, and Kaho'olawe. Ma'o means green, of course, and indeed a bright green traditional dye is derived from this plant, but you must know which part of the plant produces the color. Anybody know? Well done. Yes, he said the flower. It's not the leaf of the ma'o. The leaf makes a nice orange-red dye. The pueo, the Hawaiian owl, is another important aumakua to many Hawaiians. It's a bird of prey that thrives in the drier lowlands. My kumu, John Keola Makainana Lake, counts the pueo among his aumakua. Although the nene goose is now relegated to marginal subalpine habitats on Hawaii and Maui, its prehistoric habitat was the warmer lowlands. Place names such as Pu'unene in the lowlands of Maui attest to the ancient distribution. Introduced predators such as dogs, cats, and mongoose have greatly narrowed their range. The fossil record indicates that a giant flightless goose was once a formidable presence in the lowland forests of Hawaii. The elepaio is an ideal signature bird of the lowland mesic forest, greeting human visitors with great curiosity. Such birds were often worked into stories that taught moral or practical lessons, such as the story of an elepaio that wanted to start a war between birds and humans because it had been hurt by a man after he had pecked a hole in his water gourd. When the birds found out that the elepaio was the one at fault, they lost sympathy over his injury and derided him with their squawks until he finally had to admit that he was the troublemaker. The amakihi is perhaps the most common native forest bird remaining in our lowland mesic forest. Its calls and songs have probably been part of the Hawaiian consciousness for 1,000 years. However, the call of the amakihi is not a very sweet one. Indeed, it's a buzzy squeak of a call that is not the most pleasant to hear, which perhaps explains why there's a Hawaiian aphorism, amakihi ava ava, sourpuss amakihi, referring to someone with a negative and criticizing disposition. The Hawaiian bat is called ōpe'a pe'a. The name evokes a pe'a, a sail as on a canoe. Considering the traditional sail of a voyaging canoe, the membranes spread between the wings of a bat are very much like full sail spread from the canoe masts and spars. Leaving the lowlands and moving up into the montane rainforests of ancient Hawaii, lush moss-covered branches rise to close canopies and protect delicate ferns, shrubs, and plants beneath. These wet systems dominated, as they do today, on the wet windward flanks of the higher islands, above 3,000 feet elevation, where cloud or rain is a daily occurrence. In lowland and mesic and dry forest, tree diversity is highest, but in the montane wet forest, overall plant diversity is highest, with many hundreds of species of herbs, shrubs, vines, and ferns. This lush mix of giant ape-ape, lobeliads, and ferns lines the wet gulches running through the montane forests of East Maui. Our only native carnivorous plant is a delicate sundew that grows in the montane bogs of the island of Kauai. The Hawaiian name, Mikinalo, means fly sucker, an indication that Hawaiians observed and appreciated its insect-eating nature. The rich red fruit of the akala, the Hawaiian raspberry, catches the eye, but what escapes notice is the thorns. Many Hawaiian plants have lost defenses through millennia of evolution in a system lacking large mammalian herbivores. The fruit were not only nutritious, but provided a beautiful pink dye, which was used to color kapa and points back to the plant's name, akala being the word for pink. Here's a delicate sertandra, aptly called by Hawaiians ha'ivale, broken easily. They can persist only in pristine, pig-free wet forests, a habitat only rarely encountered today. The montane forest was considered wawakua by ancient Hawaiians, the realm of the gods, and chants describe the native sertandras that marked this realm and that was not often visited by humans. The wawakua was part of a fundamental dichotomy in the Hawaiian universe. The waukanaka was the realm of humans, typically at lower elevations where coastal and lowland resources were plentiful and human beings thrived. The uplands where the wawakua were that which grew did not so by human effort but via the gods, and that realm was profoundly sacred and considered perilous for human incursion. So only small parties led by specialists with knowledge of the forest and its resources could enter the wawakua, and only with purposeful, positive intent and after rigorous ceremonial protocols and preparations. On steep cliffs at the heads of walls of valleys, a rich mix of ferns and shrubs hold erosion in check and provide for an essential watershed for human agriculture below. That the wawakua was considered a sacred source of rain and water is an indication of the knowledge that such areas needed to be protected to ensure continuity of life. Vines of ʻie climb the trunks of wet forest trees and offer clusters of fruit for birds such as the ō'u. The tough, flexible aerial roots provided the woven framework for sturdy feathered helmets, the mahiole, worn by chiefs. Red ōhi'a berries provided food for nene, oma'o thrush, and other birds foraging through the openings in wet forests. And for Hawaiians, the berries are sacred to Pele, akua of volcanism, and ohelo is plentiful around the active volcanic crater of Kilauea. The ōhi'a lehua tree is the dominant species in Hawaiian wet forests of all islands, an adaptable and extremely variable species in flower color, leaf shape, stature, etc. Its nectar-rich flowers provide the mainstay for Hawaiian honey creepers, such as this apopane. The ōhi'a, as dominant tree of the wawakua, the sacred upland realm, was considered a physical manifestation of the major Hawaiian god Ku. A large ōhi'a tree possessed such high mana that a tree harvested ceremonially, destined to be carved into an image of Ku, would demand the human sacrifice. The lehua, the blossom of the ōhi'a tree, typically crimson red, was also the term used for the first warrior to fall in battle, or a standout expert in any practice. The Maui parrotbill is actually a honey creeper with a bill specialized for snapping through twigs in search of grubs. The bill is so strong that it snaps through thick, strong twigs easily. An ornithologist friend of mine still bears scars from one of these very rare and endangered birds. She was studying them in Kipuhulu Valley on Maui and had caught one in a mist net. She was carefully measuring it using heavy leather gloves to protect her fingers when she saw it was 4 o'clock. That's radio check-in time. She had to do the radio check because if you fail to check in, a rescue party is sent to find you. So she was trying to finish her measurements with the parrot bill in one hand and work the radio in the other hand, and found that she couldn't press the radio buttons with the heavy gloves on, and so she took off one of the gloves and at that moment, her bare fingers exposed, the parrot bill reached over and bit her finger to the bone. Her radio was on at that moment, and I'd never heard such language from an ornithologist before or since. But today she shows the V-shaped scar proudly. She says, "See this? Maui parrot bill, Kipohulu, 1981. The ʻiʻiwi is one of the scarlet honeycreepers whose brilliant feathers were worked into symbols of highest rank. ʻiʻiwi provided the red feathers, while the mamo and o'o provided both yellow and black. The brilliant colors of forest birds directly link the chiefly ali'i class with the wawakua, the realm of the gods. The Hawaiian happy-face spider shares the brilliant colors of the ahu'ula cape and spends its entire life under the protective cover of a sturdy leaf on a shrub in the understory of native Hawaiian forests. It's a little hard to imagine that this kind of coloration might serve as camouflage. But the sunlight that shines through a leaf renders the yellow body transparent, making it nearly invisible to birds. The pulelehua, or Kamehameha butterfly, is one of only 2 native butterflies in the Hawaiian fauna. Its caterpillars feed on mamaki shrubs that grow along the riverbanks in Hawaiian wet forests. And while we're on the subject, anybody know our other native Hawaiian butterfly? Okay, good. Some people do. It's Blackburn's butterfly, a little green lycaenid that favors koa and a'ali'i. So now you know. You can say, I know 100% of the native butterfly fauna of the Hawaiian Islands. Okay. Pupu kuahiwi, Hawaiian tree snails, feed on algae and molds that grow on the leaves of wet forest plants. This denizen of the wawakua was also considered supernatural and is said to sing in a whistling voice at night. 2 male hammer-headed Hawaiian flies battle for mating territory in a branch of an olapa tree. Above 6,000 feet, we pass from the montane zone and into the subalpine and alpine ecosystems. The tropical inversion layer limits the formation of clouds, and the lush montane wet forest below the cloud layer contrasts strongly with the dry, sparse, and barren mountain tops above them. Again separated from moisture, set above the average cloud tops, the subalpine zone mimics the dry lowland zone and includes many of the same plant species. In these highest zones, it can be extremely hot by day without the protection of clouds, and at night, temperatures can plunge well below freezing. Only the most powerful storms bring rain and snow to the alpine zones, otherwise desert-like. But once the challenges of high elevation environment are dealt with, adapted species are free to thrive and proliferate, leading to some spectacular results, such as the āhinahina, the Hawaiian silver swords. Hawaiian honeycreepers have even here found a niche. The palila is a seed eater that depends on subalpine mamane forests for its survival. High above the vegetation limits is a snowy alpine zone seemingly devoid of living things. This is the realm of Poliahu, the goddess of snows, who lives on the highest mountain in the archipelago, Mauna Kea, which can mean White Mountain, but in deeper meaning alludes to the sky father of Hawaiian creation, Wakea. What can live in this snowy, barren wilderness? The vekiu bug, named for its habitat on the highest peak of Mauna Kea, is flightless and dark to absorb the warmth of the sun in the icy desert setting. The riddle is this: what does the vekiu bug eat? And the answer is, it eats frozen food. But it's true. Strong trade winds blow insects up from the rich forest below, and as they freeze and die on the snow patches or amidst the cinders and boulders, the vekiu bug emerge to feed on this allochthonous Aeolian food source. Aeolian means on the winds, right? Allochthonous means from somewhere else. I had the pleasure to be copy in a cubby right next to a Greek student when I was in grad school. And I had written a paper on allochthonous ecological relationships, and I had him read the draft of the thing, and he comes back to me and he goes, "Do you know what this word means?" And I said, "From somewhere else?" And he goes, "Oh, that's right." Because in Greece, they used allochthonous to mean from out of town. Mm-hmm. So he said he was thinking, he was going, food from out of town. As challenging as the environment of the Alpine zone is, it's clear that this zone was important to Hawaiians. The standing stones of shrines rise far above the moisture and warmth of the lowlands. And what would draw people to this barren ecosystem? Near the shrine is an area of unusual stones. Fresh-looking blue-gray surfaces contrast against a background of weathered brown. A closer look reveals a roughly rectangular block atop the flakes, a hewn form that will be worked further into the main carving tool in Hawaii, a ko'i, or adze. So this is the resource that drew Hawaiians into the frigid mountaintop, the highest quality source of adzes in perhaps all of the Pacific. Generations of kahuna ka ko'i, adze-making specialists, made pilgrimages to this sacred site to gather and work the stone tool that in turn was essential for building the infrastructure of Hawaiian life. The snows of Mauna Kea also represent the highest waters of the island, water that flow from the mountain tops to the sea. The highest liquid water and alpine lake is to be found in Waiau, near the summit of Mauna Kea. Waiau is a storied entrance to Milu, the Hawaiian realm that follows mortal life. Like all significant waters, Waiau is considered the home of one of the mo'o, water-related guardian deities, usually female. Anybody know the name of the mo'o of Waiau? Okay, I won't give the answer. You guys got to look it up. Okay. It's mo'o'ina nea. Running through the different zones of the Hawaiian landscape to the sea are freshwater streams that provide habitat for endemic Hawaiian freshwater species. Opai kalaole, for example, are endemic Hawaiian stream shrimp, whose ancestors lived in the surrounding sea, and kalamai. But whenever I see an opai, I can't help but think how nicely it would go with ho'i'o. Okay. Native gobies such as the o'opu alamo'o move from marine habitats into Hawaiian streams. They still send their eggs downstream, which hatch and undergo larval transformations and development as marine plankton before returning to streams to mature. The alamo'o is considered a physical manifestation of the Hawaiian mo'o deities of pools and lakes, and so is not considered a food fish. Similarly, our stream nerite snail, hihiwai, lays eggs on stream boulders, but the snail hatchlings are washed down to the sea and need to crawl slowly back upstream as they grow. Regarded as a tasty delicacy, the hihiwai is gathered by night when they emerge and forage on large submerged stream boulders. You wouldn't dare gather hihiwai on a stormy night, when the stream might rise and wash you away in the darkness to drown. So a night that is just right for gathering hihiwai is called just that, he po hihiwai. A night for gathering hihiwai, a calm, starry night, when the hihiwai are emerged and plentiful on the stream boulders, and the streams are running clear and no danger of flash floods. So the phrase he po hihiwai symbolizes any endeavor conducted under optimum conditions, similar to the saying, strike while the iron is hot. Many species of delicate Hawaiian damselflies, pinau'ula, grace the streams of different islands. Their young are aquatic predators, while as adults they catch small airborne insects in wet forest. Hawaiians took notice of the pinau, and there is a heiau, an ancient temple site, on the island of Kauai named for this native insect, indicating how the elements of the natural world might receive great significance and be reflected in name, story, song, and even large religious infrastructure. Just recently, I was taken by a fellow practitioner of Kauai to the Pinau Heiau site, where I found that it's associated with freshwater springs that still run. And I thought to myself, kahe kawai lele ka pinau, that is, where there's flowing water, the pinau are flying. Streams and wetlands provide habitat for water birds, such as the Hawaiian coot, alai ke'o ke'o, and the Hawaiian duck, koloa mauli. Another water bird, the alai'ula, figures prominently in Hawaiian culture as the holder of the secret of fire making. The demigod Maui wrested that secret from the alai and brought fire making to people, and the alai's fiery markings on head and legs attest to the bird's connection to the secret of fire. The larger streams eventually reach the sea, connecting the terrestrial realm with that of the marine. And here, the large stream of Waipi'o tumbles into the ocean of North Kohala, bringing nutrients from the land. On islands of volcanic origin, much of the coastline is rocky, providing a very complex habitat for a variety of creatures. The many small spaces are extremely important refuge and nursery grounds for juvenile fish. And even after millennia of erosion, on the older islands, the boulder-dominated rocky shallows are still home for a special set of living things. These include a'ama crab, often volcanic black to match the boulders, opihi, or native limpet, a much sought-after delicacy, a large number of seaweeds, limu, that provide much of the vitamin content of the ancient Hawaiian diet, and which was a major food source for both opihi and the ha'ukeuke sea urchin, a species whose shape and strong tube feet hold it fast against the roughest waves. Where the currents create large expanses of sandy bottom, a completely different set of species finds a home. Beds of seagrass, not a seaweed, but a true flowering plant, provide forage for honu, the sea turtles, and the sandy bottoms are filled with crustaceans and other small invertebrates that are felt out by the kumu, the goatfish, so called because of the whiskers below its chin, used to feel for vibrations of its prey in the sand. Ava, a milkfish, often swarms in large numbers in this habitat, and their light silvery color disappears against the bright sandy background. And ōhi'a, a bonefish, is another bottom feeder that marks the near-shore sandy ecosystems. People often picture a rich coral reef when imagining Hawaiian marine ecosystems, and indeed, the reefs of Hawaii are a dynamic and complex habitat for many species. Our reefs are created in large part by the gradual building of calcium carbonate skeletons of billions of individual coral animals, polyps. Now, these are the first living things mentioned in the Kumulipo, the Hawaiian chant of creation, and coral, ko'a, is also the word used for a sacred shrine. Indeed, pieces of sun-bleached coral punctuate the platforms of many Hawaiian shrines and temples. On and in Hawaiian reefs live such creatures as the punohu, slate pencil urchin, many species of brightly colored nudibranchs, sea slugs, bright because they're so often poisonous, feeding on toxic sponges as well as stinging sea anemones and incorporating the nematocysts and poisons into their own defensive organs. The lauwili nuku nuku oi oi, in the record book as the longest fish name in the world, with a long jutting snout, it's nuku nuku oi oi, that it uses to suck out individual coral polyps. The no less famous humu humu nuku nuku apua'a, looking and sounding like a pig grunting in the sea. Indeed, the supernatural demigod Kamapua'a is able to take the form of the humu humu nuku nuku apua'a and swim between islands in his storied exploits. And finally, Puhi, the moray eel, wending through the endless crevices of the reef, hunting for small fish, and in Hawaiian stories, its face can be seen in the husked coconut. The pelagic open ocean waters are where the largest predators live. The open ocean is also the migratory path for our humpback whales, the kohola. The fastest predators, the ahi, tunas, are bullet-shaped and all muscle, allowing them to chase down the fastest prey and catch them even when they leap from the water. So you notice the malolo caught in midair by that guy. Other predators include ulua, the jacks, and nai'a, our spinner dolphins. Dolphins can create bubble nets that concentrate small fish into dense swirling spheres. These are then attacked by the dolphins, tunas, and even seabirds diving in from above to take their pick. It's no wonder that these hunting areas are often marked overhead by the seabirds that they attract. Plankton feeders such as hihimanu, the eagle rays, continually cruise the water column. Monk seals, usually thought of as surface or shallow water creatures, are now known to dive as deep as 1,000 feet below the surface to feed on prey in the pelagic bottom, a deep, lightless zone. And there are other deep, lightless zones of a different kind in Hawaii Kuauli, underground. Subterranean ecosystems lie under all, whether coastal lava plain, montane wet forest, or alpine desert. There are even ankyline caves and marine caves. The volcanic foundation of the islands is rich in caves, lava tubes formed in pahoehoe lava flows. And here a skylight in the roof of such a cave sends light into an otherwise lightless world, and the roots of ōhi'a growing above reach down for moisture. These roots form the basis for a surprising Hawaiian cave ecosystem. They bring nutrients from the sunlit surface into an otherwise sterile environment, where eyeless, nearly pigmentless cave crickets wander through the root mats, feeding on decomposing plant matter. Now, they have close relatives that live in the forests above, indicating the course of evolution, an adaptive invasion of a new niche where light was no longer important. The cave crickets may have escaped their original predators, such as birds, but some predators followed them. This spider belongs to a group sometimes called the big-eyed hunting spiders, but here they become small-eyed, big-eyed hunting spiders. On Kauai, where the cave systems have had the longest time to evolve, the evolution has culminated in a no-eyed, big-eyed hunting spider. That is amazingly bizarre. Looks kind of like that. I had to Photoshop out the eyes of that guy, though. Of course, caves provided shelter, burial sites, hidden water sources, stable conditions for storage, and other important resources to Hawaiians and are considered sacred. So these were the native ecosystems of ancient Hawaii, nearly 250 different kinds of natural communities from ocean to alpine summit, including vegetated, aquatic, marine, and subterranean ecosystems. In our times, we've seen many changes to these ecosystems and great challenges to their conservation. On the island of Hawaii, much of the native ecosystem area has actually still remained with us, but the pink zones show where human influence has replaced the Hawaiian native plant and animal communities. The situation is much more severe on the island of Oahu, where nearly everything below 2,000 feet has been replaced by development or non-native ecosystems. The phenomenon of vegetation change in Hawaii is an intriguing one, and those of us who know it well sometimes wonder what the consequences might have been if we could go back at key points in history to prevent certain crucial events. But games like that can be kind of frustrating and fruitless unless we apply them moving forward toward an interaction between people and their living surroundings that recaptures the intimacy and the appreciation that inspires stewardship and sustainability. After all, the unique plants and animals of the Hawaiian ecoregion, valued greatly by evolutionary biologists worldwide, are also representatives of irreplaceable living treasures that form the foundation of Hawaiian culture. So I hope this brief tour of Hawaiian ecosystems leaves you with a clearer appreciation of Hawaii Kuauli, Hawaii of the deep green living landscape, an archipelago of wonders. So mahalo for your kind attention.